The human mind is breaking down, and no one is realizing. It was 1943. Nikola Tesla was dying alone in a New York hotel room. His hands shook as he held an aged notebook full of equations that no one would ever see. But it wasn't death that scared him. It was the absolute certainty that humanity was heading towards an invisible abyss, a silent collapse of the human mind itself. He knew. I had noticed it years before, while observing people on the streets. Something had changed. The looks were empty. The conversations are superficial. Emotions anesthetized. It was as if an invisible magnetic field was slowly turning off the spark that made humans human. Tesla called this the blackout of consciousness. That night, feverish and exhausted, he wrote his last words on yellowed paper. They will forget how to feel. They will forget how to think. And when the mind collapses, no one will notice, because there will no longer be anyone lucid enough to notice. 3 days later, Tesla was dead. The FBI raided his room and confiscated all his documents. Officially, they said it was for national security reasons, but what they really took was Tesla's last attempt to save humanity from itself. 80 years have passed, and today, in 2025, what Tesla predicted is happening exactly as he described, but in a way that no one imagined. The human mind is not collapsing because of war, disease, or natural catastrophe. It is collapsing because we are being reprogrammed, silently, invisible. Let me show you how. Have you ever stopped to observe the people around you? Not at a glance, but really observe. Look into their eyes. Try to have a deep conversation. Ask someone to spend 5 minutes in silence without touching their cell phone, just thinking. You'll realize something scary. Most people can't do this anymore. It's not laziness. It's not a lack of will. It's something deeper. It is as if the brain has lost the ability to sustain attention, to process complex emotions, to create original thoughts. Tesla called this disconnection of the internal vibrational field, the natural frequency of human consciousness being replaced by another frequency, artificial, external, controlled. He first noticed this in 1931 during one of his experiments with electromagnetic waves. Tesla was testing wireless power transmission when he noticed something strange. Certain frequencies made people around the laboratory feel restless, anxious, confused. Other frequencies made them calm, focused, even creative. That's when he understood. The human mind is not just biological. She is electric. And like any electrical system, it can be influenced, modulated, even turned off by external frequencies. Tesla became obsessed with this discovery. He spent years studying how different frequencies affected behavior, mood, and the ability to think. And he came to a terrifying conclusion. If someone controlled the frequencies around people, they could control their own consciousness. Not by force, not by direct manipulation, but by resonance. Imagine that your mind is like an antenna. It is always tuned to a specific frequency, the frequency of your true self, your essence, your awakened consciousness. But now, imagine if someone started bombarding this antenna with thousands of other frequencies, all at the same time, without stopping. What would happen? Your mind would collapse, not all at once, but little by little. She would lose the ability to tune into her own frequency. It would begin to respond only to external stimuli, and in the end, you would stop being you. He would become just a passive receiver of information, impulses and commands that he doesn't even realize he's receiving. This is exactly what is happening now. In 1943, Tesla wrote in his notebook, "The greatest danger to humanity will not come from without. It will come from within. When the human mind loses the ability to generate its own thoughts, it will become a slave to any force that knows how to feed it ready-made thoughts." At that time, no one understood what he meant. But today, 80 years later, we live in exactly this scenario. The difference is that now we call it technology, connection, progress, and we think we are in control, but we are not. Think with me. How many hours a day do you spend consuming content, news, videos, messages, posts, announcements? Now think, how many hours a day do you spend creating your own thoughts, reflecting, questioning, feeling real emotions, not just automatic reactions to what you see on the screen? The answer is scary, isn't it? Tesla knew this would happen. He predicted that there would come a time when that humanity would be capable of creating machines so powerful, so fast, so seductive, that people would no longer use their own minds. And when that happened, the mind would collapse. Not because it was destroyed, but because it was forgotten. And the most terrifying, no one would notice. Because to notice a mental breakdown, you need an awakened mind. And if the mind has already collapsed, who is there to notice? There is something Tesla discovered but never had time to fully reveal. Something he hid between the lines of his diaries, in the fragments of his last letters, in the equations that the FBI confiscated and never returned. Something about a specific frequency, a frequency he called the master wave. This frequency, according to Tesla, was the key to restoring the human mind, to reconnect people with their own consciousness, to reverse the collapse before it was too late. But where is this information now? Who has access to it? And why, after 80 years, has no one ever spoken publicly about this? If you are feeling that something inside you recognizes this truth, if you notice that your own mind is tired, scattered, almost shut down, then subscribe to this channel, because what I'm going to show you in the next few minutes could be your last chance to understand what's really happening to humanity. And maybe, just maybe, the key to turning this around before it's too late. 3 months after Tesla's death, a young engineer named Edward Mitchell was summoned to a secret meeting in the basement of a government building in Washington. Edward worked for the Navy, but that day, the men waiting for him were not wearing uniforms. They wore dark suits and even darker looks. They placed a sealed metal box on the table in front of him. Inside, fragments of Tesla's notebooks. Not all, just the pages that talked about brain frequencies, controlling electromagnetic waves, and the part that made Edward's heart freeze, manipulating the collective consciousness. "We want you to finish his work," one of the men said, emotionless, but not to save minds, to control them. Edward felt his stomach drop. He had admired Tesla his entire life. "I knew that the inventor was obsessed with freeing humanity, with giving free energy to the world, with raising people's consciousness. And now, here he was, being told to use Tesla's knowledge to do exactly the opposite. He wanted to refuse. I wanted to leave that room and never come back. But the men in suits didn't give that option. "You're going to do it, Edward, or someone less ethical will do it, and then the damage will be irreversible." That's how it started. Not with an evil plan for world domination, but with the usual justification: if it's not us, it will be them. In the following years, Edward worked on a project internally called silent resonance. The idea was simple but terrifying: using radio transmission towers and later telecommunications antennas to emit subtle frequencies that influence the emotional and mental state of urban populations. Nothing obvious, nothing that could be easily detected. Just a slight modulation in the radio waves, combined with low-frequency signals that the human brain would pick up without consciously noticing. The first tests were carried out in small towns. The results were frightening. In just 3 weeks of continuous exposure to the frequencies, people began to show clear signs of behavioral change: less questioning, more obedience, a drastic reduction in critical thinking, and, most disturbingly, a generalized sense of emotional apathy. They didn't realize. They continued living their lives normally, but something fundamental had been turned off within them. The spark that Tesla talked about so much. The frequency of awakening consciousness. Edward documented everything, every test, every result. And with every page he wrote, he felt like he was betraying not just Tesla, but humanity itself. He knew he was creating a weapon, not physical destruction, but of mental destruction, and worse, an invisible weapon. And in 1952, Edward had a nervous breakdown. "I couldn't bear to carry that weight any longer." He asked to leave the project. He threatened to leak the documents. That's when he received a visitor in the early hours of the morning. 2 men entered his house without knocking. They weren't the same as before. They were younger, colder. "You're not leaving, Edward. You know too much. But we're going to give you a choice. Keep working, quietly, and we'll protect you and your family. Or try to expose us, and find out what happens to those who try to stop the inevitable." Edward never talked about leaving again. But he did something no one expected. He started hiding information. With each experiment, with each advance, he created an official version of the data, the one he handed over to his superiors, and a real version, which he hid in different locations. Codes within codes, equations disguised as simple calculations, frequency maps hidden in musical scores. He was building a secret archive, a complete manual on how frequencies were being used to collapse the human mind, and most importantly, how to reverse the process. But Edward knew he couldn't keep it forever. Someone, somewhere, in the future, would have to find this information. Someone brave enough to use them. Meanwhile, the Silent Resonance Project expanded. In the 60s, they were no longer just radio towers. They were TV antennas. In the 80s, satellites. In the 2000s, mobile phone networks. And now, in 2025, we are completely surrounded by an invisible network of frequencies that subtly modulate the way we think, feel, and behave. Do you think this is a conspiracy theory? Then explain why, in the last 20 years, there has been an exponential increase in anxiety disorders, depression, attention deficit disorder, and emotional breakdowns. Explain why people are increasingly incapable of deep concentration, of genuine empathy, of independent thought. It's not just modern life. It's not just stress. It's something deeper. It is the human mind being bombarded 24 hours a day by frequencies that were not made for it, frequencies that gradually turn off the ability to be fully conscious. Tesla knew this, Edward confirmed, and now, 80 years later, we are living at the height of this collapse. The difference is that, this time, the collapse is global. There are no more isolated cities being tested. We are all part of the experiment, and most have no idea. But there is a detail that few know. Edward didn't die taking the secret to his grave. Before passing away in 1987, he left clues, not obvious, not direct, but clues that, if connected, would lead to the secret archive he built over decades. He knew he couldn't just publish everything. He would be killed. Your family would be threatened. So he did something brilliant. He spread the information in unlikely places, obscure libraries, public files that no one looks at, even on seemingly irrelevant patents registered under false names. He left a map, but a map that would only be understood by someone who was actually looking, someone who suspected something was wrong, someone who felt, deep down in their soul, that the human mind was being attacked invisibly. And the question remains, who found this map? Who, in the last 30 years, had access to this information? And more importantly, what did they do with them? Because if someone really discovered Edward's secret work, two things are possible. Either this person is using the information to help humanity awaken, or they are using it to make the control even deeper, even more irreversible. And you, who are watching this now, need to understand, you are not just a spectator of this story, you are part of it. Because the collapse that Tesla predicted, that Edward documented, is not happening out there. It's happening inside you, inside me. Inside every person who believes they are living freely, but in reality, they are just responding to frequencies that they don't even realize. The war for the human mind has begun. And the most terrifying? Most people are fighting on the wrong side without knowing it. In 2008, a librarian named Sarah Chen found something strange while cataloging old documents at the Boston Public Library. It was an unmarked cardboard box, covered in dust, hidden behind shelves that no one had visited in decades. Inside, there were musical scores, dozens of them, all signed by someone called E. Morrison, a composer Sarah had never heard of. She almost threw it all away, but something made her stop. The musical notes felt wrong. They did not follow any known harmonic pattern. They were strange, almost mathematical sequences. Sarah, who had a background in music, realized that this was not art. It was code. It took her 3 months to figure it out. Each note represented a number, each pause, a coordinate. And when she finally put the puzzle together, what appeared in front of her made her tremble. Frequencies, electromagnetic waves, and names of cities where resonance tests had been conducted between 1945 and 1985. Sarah didn't know who Edward Mitchell was. I had no idea about the Silent Resonance Project, but now he had physical proof in his hands that something much bigger was happening. And worse, the frequencies described in those scores were still active. She checked. Cell towers, Wi-Fi networks, broadcasts, radio scions, all operating in exactly the ranges that Edward had documented as consciousness modulating. She did what any rational person would do. She tried to warn someone. He looked for journalists, academics, activists, sent detailed emails with copies of documents. And do you know what happened? Absolutely nothing. Nobody took it seriously. Some laughed, others called her crazy. Most simply ignored it. That's when Sarah understood something that Tesla and Edward had known for a long time. No matter how clear the truth is, if people aren't vibrating at the right frequency to receive it, they simply won't listen. Not because they don't want to, but because they can't. Their minds have already been tuned to reject any information that threatens their field of comfort and control. Sarah didn't give up. If no one was going to believe her saying it, she needed to show it. He spent the next 3 years studying electrical engineering, wave physics, and neuroscience. I wanted to deeply understand how those frequencies really worked, and that's when he made an even more disturbing discovery. Frequencies didn't just influence behavior, they created dependence. She discovered that certain electromagnetic waves, when exposed to the brain for a prolonged period of time, generated a type of neural addiction. The brain began to need that external stimulus to function. Without it, a person felt anxiety, emptiness, restlessness. It was as if the mind had forgotten how to generate its own internal energy. And then Sarah made the final connection. It was no coincidence that, over the past 20 years, humanity had become completely dependent on wireless technologies, cell phones, tablets, Bluetooth headphones, Wi-Fi networks everywhere. People could no longer stay disconnected, and they called it information need. But Sarah knew it was something different. It was neural chemical dependency, induced by invisible frequencies. She tested it on herself. He spent an entire week without any electronic devices. He turned off his cell phone, his router. He disconnected everything. The first 3 days were hell. Extreme anxiety, feeling of loss, emotional emptiness. But on the 4th day, something changed. She began to feel her mind waking up, as if emerging from a dense fog, clearer thoughts, deeper emotions, a sense of presence she hadn't experienced in years. That's when Sarah realized she had been disconnected from her own consciousness, and I didn't even know. In 2011, Sarah began looking for other people who had found clues to Edward's work. He created anonymous forums, published excerpts of documents on obscure websites, and left traces for anyone who was really looking, and eventually found 3 people: a former telecommunications engineer in Germany, a neuroscientist in Japan, and a retired physicist in Brazil. Each of them had reached the same conclusion through different paths. The human mind was under attack, not by accident, not because of a side effect, but by design. They formed a secret group, no official name, no formal organization, just 4 people spread across the world, sharing information and trying to piece together the complete puzzle. And it was in this group that Sarah discovered something that changed everything. Edward Mitchell was not the only one. There were others. There were other scientists over the decades who realized what was going on and tried to leave clues. And they all had hidden one thing in common: the frequency that Tesla called the master wave. According to the fragments they managed to gather, this specific frequency had the power to reverse the process of reconnecting the human brain to its own internal source of consciousness, to restore the ability to think, feel, and create independently. It was like an antidote, a complete neural reset. But there was a problem. The exact frequency has never been completely recorded. Edward had divided the information into parts, scattered in different locations, and now, decades later, some of that information was lost, destroyed, or worse, hidden by those who knew of its power and didn't want it to be used. Sarah and her group spent the next few years trying to rebuild the formula. They tested hundreds of combinations. Some did nothing. Others caused dangerous side effects, severe headaches, disorientation, even seizures. But they continued, because they knew that if they couldn't, humanity was doomed to an irreversible collapse. In 2019, they finally did it. Not the full frequency, but something close enough. Sarah tested it on herself first. They used a modified wave generator, programmed to emit the sequence they had calculated. He put on his headphones. He pressed the button. The first seconds were strange, a soft, almost imperceptible hum. Then a feeling of expansion, as if your mind was opening. And then silence. Not the silence of the absence of sound, but the silence of total clarity. For the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was completely present, completely herself. It only lasted 20 minutes, but it was the most lucid 20 minutes of his life. And when it was over, she knew this worked. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And if they could refine it, if they could make it accessible, they could save millions of minds from collapse. But then came the dilemma: how to distribute this without being tracked, how to teach people to use it without the system discovering and destroying everything, and worse, how to ensure that this technology does not fall into the wrong hands and is used for even deeper control. That's when Sarah noticed something that made her freeze. While she and her group secretly worked to rebuild the master wave, someone else was also looking for her, someone with much more resources, much more power, and that someone didn't want to free minds. I wanted to imprison them once and for all. In November 2019, the group's Brazilian physicist disappeared. No warning, no goodbye. It simply stopped responding. 2 weeks later, the Japanese neuroscientist sent a final message. They know, delete everything. And he never showed any sign of life again. Sarah deleted all the files. He burned the papers, destroyed the hard drives, but she kept one thing: the frequency sequence, recorded on an old cassette tape, hidden in a place that only she knew, and waited, because she understood that it was not the time to reveal it. Not yet. Humanity needed to be ready to receive this information. I needed to be desperate enough to look, aware enough to recognize the truth when he saw it. And now in 2025, with the human mind entering the final stage of collapse, Sarah feels the moment is coming, not for her to act alone, but to plant the seeds, to leave clues, so that those who still have the spark of awakened consciousness can find the way. But there's one question that haunts her every night. What if it's already too late? What if most people are already so disconnected, so asleep, that even with the master wave, there is no one left inside to wake up? January 2023. Sarah Chen was at a coffee shop in Portland when she saw something that made her blood run cold. On the establishment's TV, a report about the new generation of 5G networks being installed in the main cities around the world. But it wasn't the towers that scared her. It was the operating frequency. Exactly the same range that Edward Mitchell had marked in his secret documents as the total collapse threshold, the point at which the human mind would completely lose the ability to generate independent thoughts. She left the cafe without finishing her coffee. He ran home. He pulled out the cassette tape hidden behind a false wall in the closet, and he made a decision that he had been putting off for years. It was time to act. The risk didn't matter. It didn't matter who came after her. If we did nothing now, in a few years there would be no one conscious enough to realize that humanity had stopped being human. But Sarah knew she couldn't just post attendance online. It would be erased in minutes, tracked, destroyed. So she did something different, something that Edward and Tesla would have done. Hid the truth inside something that everyone could see, but that few would understand. She created music. It took 6 months. Sarah learned music production, advanced harmonic theory, and how to incorporate sub-threshold frequencies into audio tracks without them being detected by monitoring algorithms. And then he released a series of guided meditations on streaming platforms. Apparently harmless, just relaxing sounds, gentle beats, piano waves. But within each track, encoded in the deepest layers of the audio, was the master wave. Not complete, that would be dangerous, but fragments of it. Enough to start to awaken something in people who listened carefully. Enough to create a crack in the veil of unconsciousness that enveloped them. The tracks went viral. Millions of people started listening, and the comments that appeared were strange. I heard that and I cried without knowing why. After listening to it, I felt like I woke up from a years-long dream. Something inside me changed, and I don't know how to explain it. Sarah monitored everything silently, and he saw, with his own eyes, the impossible happening. People were beginning to wake up, little by little, gradually, but it was working. Until, one Tuesday morning in August 2023, all of his music was removed from the platforms. No explanation, no warning, simply deleted, and together with them, his bank account was frozen. Her apartment ransacked while she was gone, and a note left on the kitchen table, handwritten, with just 6 words, "You shouldn't have done that." Sarah disappeared that same night. He didn't come home. He didn't call anyone. I knew they had found her, and I knew that if I stayed, I would be silenced, permanently. But she had a plan, one last move, something I had been preparing since 2019, in case that day came. Before escaping, she sent a package to 12 different people around the world, people she has never met in person, people who had commented on her songs with the right words, words that only someone truly awakened would use. Inside each package, a complete copy of the frequency, detailed instructions on how to use it, and a letter, handwritten. If you are reading this, it is because there is still hope. The human mind is collapsing, but you felt it, you noticed it, and that means there is still something alive inside you. Use this frequency, not to save yourself alone, but to awaken others, one by one, silently, because the war for consciousness will not be won with shouts. It will be won with whispers, with small cracks in the invisible matrix that imprisons us. Do your part, and trust others to do theirs. Of the 12 packages, only 5 reached their destination. The others were intercepted, but 5 was enough. One of them came into the hands of a young programmer in Berlin called Lucas. He didn't believe it at first. He thought it was some kind of prank, but something in that letter struck a chord with him, because Lucas had been feeling like something was wrong for years, that your mind was no longer yours, who lived on autopilot, just reacting, never really thinking. He built the frequency generator following the instructions, tested it on yourself, and what happened was overwhelming. It wasn't gradual. It wasn't smooth. It was as if a wall inside his mind had exploded. Memories came back. Real emotions, not mechanical reactions, flooded his chest. And for the first time in a decade, Lucas felt like he was truly alive. He cried for 2 hours straight, not out of sadness, but relief, of anger, to realize how many years he had wasted living as a ghost of himself. And then he did what Sarah asked. He began to awaken others, not in an obvious way, not publishing online, but discreetly, close friends, people I trusted, one by one. Each person who woke up 2 others, and those, 4 more, and so on. It was slow, it was silent, but it was working. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Sarah was hiding in an isolated cabin in the mountains of Canada. No cell phone, no internet, just her, the snow, and the certainty that she had done what needed to be done. But one night in December 2024, she heard a knock on the door. His heart raced. She thought they had found her. That was the end. But when he opened the door, there were no men in suits. It was a woman, young, bright eyes, and in his hands a copy of the letter that Sarah had sent. "My name is Elena," the woman said, her voice shaking. "I got your package. I used the frequency, And now I see everything. And I came here because we need to do more. We need to take this further. Because Sarah, they're accelerating. The new towers they're installing, it's not just control, it's erasure. They don't just want to manipulate our minds anymore. They want to shut them down completely. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. How do you know that? Elena smiled, but it was a sad smile, because I was one of them. I worked for the company that's developing the technology, and when I awakened, I saw the internal plans. I saw the timeline. Sarah, we have less than a year. After that, the master wave will no longer work, because there will be nothing left to awaken. The collapse will be irreversible. Sarah was silent for a long minute. He looked at Elena. He looked into the darkness outside. And then, for the first time in years, he smiled, not out of joy, but determination. Then we don't have time to waste, Sarah said, grabbing her coat. If we have a year, let's use every second of it. We have 5 people awakening others. Now there are 6 of us. And you said you know their plans? I know everything, Elena replied. Dates, locations, exact frequencies they will use, and most importantly, I know where they keep Tesla's original files, the ones the FBI never returned, the ones with the complete master wave formula. Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, true hope. Then let's go get them, she said, her voice firm, and we will finish what Tesla started, no matter what it takes. Because if the human mind will collapse, let at least some of us be awake to witness it, and to fight until the last second. Elena stretched out her hand. Sarah squeezed, and at that moment, in the icy mountains of Canada, 2 women invisible to the eyes of the world decided to fight the final battle for humanity's conscience. And the clock was ticking.